Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar and thanks for joining. It's called How to Talk to Your SQL Data with Function Calling, and my name is Yukti and I will be your moderator today. One of my main jobs here at SingleStore is to organize weekly AI webinars. We are organizing maybe 2, 3 webinars per week. We demonstrate different data and AI use cases and different tools and technologies. We also post about our upcoming channel webinars every week. So if any of these topics are interesting to you, feel free to connect with me or follow a SingleStore to stay on top of the loop. And we'll also like to hear your feedback or ideas on topics that you would like to see in future sessions. So please feel free to drop in a message to anyone on the team. And moving forward, speaking of future sessions, we've got multiple informative webinar sessions that are coming up. On September 9th, we have Augment Your DB to speed up and scale your SaaS app. And on September 10th, we have a webinar with Akmal. You might be aware of him. So it's called Intro to Vectors. It's a pretty beginner and intermediate friendly webinar and will be pretty hands-on. And on September 20th, we have how to use SingleStore for auto scaling. This has been rescheduled a bit, so really looking forward to your attendance over there. Apologize for that one. So if any of these topics are interesting to you, RSVP right now, and I hope to see you all there. So coming back to today's topic, you're welcome to participate in the discussion throughout the session using the Zoom Q&A button, which is present at the bottom of your console. We have an internal mission statement to try to answer 100% of the audience questions live. And if that's not possible, we also will follow up with folks afterwards via email. Just make sure that you have logged into Zoom with your actual name and email address because we will not be taking any anonymous questions. Moving on, we would like you all to have a dynamic experience during this webinar. So feel free to try out SingleStore notebooks today. Anyone who tries it today, Madhukar, can you please go to the next slide? Thank you. So anyone who tries it today will be entered for a chance to win either branded new AirPods Pro or Meta's new Ray-Ban LLM smart glasses. It's absolutely the winner's choice. We simply click the link that's present on your screen. If you're not able to access it, I will be putting everything in the chat and you just simply log in. It just takes 10-15 seconds. We highly encourage you to actually load in your data and create an organization and try out SingleStore hands-on during this webinar session so you can make the best use out of your time. So you may know that SingleStore has had a free trial offer for many years, but in the past few weeks, we've also announced a new free share tier, which we will talk about a bit later today. So allow me to introduce our speaker today. So we have Madhukar with us. He is our CMO and a senior technical evangelist here at SingleStore and has extensive experience in tech. So he can totally assist you with any of the technical questions that you have right now. So you can utilize that time during the Q&A. So take it away, Madhukar. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Yukti. Yeah, so good to be back and good to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is building applications. And, my favorite stack as of today is Next.js. So I, for a change, will not be showing notebooks, but if you're interested, just let me know and we can definitely switch over to talk a little bit about that too. So before we get started, just to ground everybody, we are almost 24 months into since ChatGPT came about, and a lot has happened already. But we work with a lot of enterprise customers, and enterprise customers are typically, maybe $500 million in revenue and up, or definitely over $100 million revenue and up. Or actually, I just forgot. So before anybody else asks this question, because the most common question, yes, we are recording it, and this recording will be made available to everybody. If you are looking for the code, I can also point you to the starter code. But if you're looking for the code that I show today, I'm happy to share that as well as a follow-up from this. So talking about Gen AI, of course, last year, when ChatGPT came about, retrieval augmented generation became a really big thing, at least when it came to enterprise. And the reason for that being that the large language models, as we know, they're trained on publicly available data or a certain data set. So let's say if I am some very large bank and I have 20 petabytes or maybe 1 exabyte of data, the large language model doesn't know about it. So what tends to happen with building an application there is that your application first based on the query they get from the user. That's the number one. They first go and search for that data in the enterprise data, and then they get back the quote unquote context, which they then give to a large language model and say, hey, use your skills or your knowledge, not the knowledge, actually, use your skills or intelligence now to answer this question, but only ground it with the data that I just got. And that's a very basic principle of RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. And in fact, I was doing some research about it. Retrieval augmented generation is a term that was coined by Meta or Facebook at that time when they had written a paper about it. But last year, a lot of people, including myself, we were calling it in context learning. The idea is to be able to get the data as context and then use the large language model to answer the questions. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, at that time, what happened was people mostly over-rotated towards semantic search, because if you are doing a search retrieval, now with the advent of transformers model, you're basically able to do a lot better semantic search. And the semantic search really consists of taking your data, converting it into vectors, and then doing one of the two things to get the data. One is either a dot product, or the other one is cosine similarity. In essence, what it's doing is it's taking your data, the unstructured data, it could be an image, could be a video, could be an audio, could be a PDF file, and it converts them into floats or vectors with comma-separated values. And when you do a search, it basically looks for other data objects which are closer to each other, and then returns what is called a semantic result or semantic query result. So if I were to say, is there a dog in this sentence, which is Huskies are from Alaska, if I were to do like an exact keyword search, then of course the answer would be no, because we would be searching for the exact specific characters in this case. And this is the reason why, even in today, in let's say Google Docs and stuff, where they're still using an exact keyword match, doesn't really work. But with the advent of transformers model, and also in general, the large language models, the semantic search really took off. But it has been around for a while. Semantic search is not something new. It's just that the models using them got better. Now, because you use unstructured data for vectors, it turns out that a lot of existing enterprises were now looking at taking their existing architecture, which typically consists of your application, your transactional database, your analytics database, and then you have your enterprise users maybe talking directly to your analytics database, and then your applications talking to your transactional database. Now, because of all of this, you were also being asked, or the enterprises were also being asked to add another database or kind of database just to store the vectors. So the goal would be, okay, I don't want my entire data into vectors for semantic search. I want some. So now you create a brand new process of taking some data, creating vectors, and then updating it in vector database. And in order to add AI features, you're now calling your vector database, getting back a chunk, then you'll go back and do another re-ranking. It got a lot more complicated. This was one of the reasons why a lot of systems within enterprises that were using AI didn't really go into production, because it takes a long time for existing infrastructure like this to get even more complicated. But in that time, there were several things that changed. There was a lot of things that were happening overall, both at the AI level, the large language model level, and also in the frameworks that use these AI models as well. So what we started to see, at least when I started talking to customers, was a lot of customers were saying, and it's on me that the first time I was talking about RAG, somebody asked me and I didn't quite get it. But very large enterprises actually have a lot of structured data or semi-structured data that might be sitting in either MySQL, or it could be sitting in Snowflake, Postgres, Databricks. or even in Mongo because it's in JSON. So when we are using RAG in an enterprise data, sure, there is vector search for which I have to add another vector database. But what about all the structured queries? In fact, there's one customer I was talking to, and he said, look, I have a 17-page long SQL that has evolved over the years, and it knows how to access my data because it has context about what does my quarter mean, what is the specific catalog of my database, and a whole bunch of other things that go into it. How do I expect an AI to run that SQL query? So in this architecture, what you're really seeing is what I call as a speedy layer. I mean, the whole latency thing is a whole different topic. But the reason why enterprise AI need to look at both accuracy and speed is because your user interface otherwise becomes really slow. There were certain products like Rabbit or Humane Pen that just didn't work because not only they were slow, but they were also returning wrong answers. Whereas if you look at Perplexity, which is one of the leading knowledge engines now, they use RAG in real time. And the reason for that is because they get the data from the knowledge from the large language model, but they also match it with real-time data and then respond within a few seconds. And if it's more than a few seconds, that is kind of very poor user experience. People have already moved on. So what we did with SingleStore, I'm happy to talk a little bit about what this is. We had already vectors within that, and we added more features in there. But you could talk to SingleStore, and you could run both analytics queries as well as plain SQL queries. So it's a row-based and columnar-based. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And you can also run vector search as well as keyword search. And you could do it in one single query, SQL query. And the best part is because of the architecture, you can run those queries across. Yesterday, there was a webinar that we did across 1 trillion rows of data, and you would still maintain a few milliseconds of response times. Now, I know as a developer, this sounds too good to be true. Candidly, before I joined, that was my thinking as well, till I actually tried it out. And if you compare it with certain MySQL or other JSON databases, it is not once or twice, it's like about 100x faster. And again, if you look at our YouTube videos and stuff, there are ways to go and try this out on your own too. So SingleStore, because it has both CDC in and out, you can bring in the data, and while the data is coming in, you can turn certain kinds of data into vectors. And then now using a SQL query, you can run all of it in one single go. Now, when it comes to querying the structured data, which is, rows and tables, or it could be JSON as well, one thing that a lot of people tried, and there is still a whole, research area going on, is doing text to SQL, which is, okay, I'm still going to go and grab all that data, but instead of me writing the SQL, I'm just going to ask the large language model to go generate the SQL and run it. And in fact, we did that too. We created the plugin at OpenAI, I think about 1.5 years ago. We have our own Squirrel. If you are not aware of it, just go sign up. Bottom right, you would see Squirrel, and it generates, using your natural language, it actually generates the SQL. And I use it quite a lot because that has been specifically trained on the SQL syntax for SingleStore. So a lot of our customers are actually now using it, and they're using it also for optimizing the queries as well. So a lot of the queries that we see is like, hey, here's my very large SQL query, but can you make it more performant, and with shard keys and whatnot. So text to SQL is good, and there's an open source, there are a bunch of open source models now specific to SQL. Their accuracy rate is getting better, and I do expect it to get a lot better, but it's still about 30 to 40% accuracy rate, right? And the other issue with that is the text to SQL is great, but only for a specific SQL dialect. For example, there are multiple SQL dialects. There is MySQL, there is PL SQL, and then of course within SingleStore and others, there are a few additional functions. There are a few different things that you can do, which you cannot do with other SQL. So it's a hit and a miss. And if you're using this in an enterprise, then you can absolutely not just rely on text to SQL. It could be one of the things you could do, but not absolutely for querying all the data. So there were two other things that came along in the last few months, I would say almost a year ago. The first was function calling, which is what we're going to look at. And the second, which has evolved now, is agents. So how does this work? So let's say now I have my application. When I need to go and grab data, and the left side is missing here because it's the same as the previous slide, where somebody asked for a query, I actually have a bunch of definition of my functions here. And in my one function, I could have an entire SQL. This is what I would show. The other function is also SQL that my data analyst teams have written. And this is part of my application. But when I call the LLM, I use a feature called function calling to say, hey, here's the query. By the way, I have these functions to do certain things. And if you don't know, then just call these functions. And these functions will return the data to you in a formatted JSON format. Then use that and do the rest of the thing that you need to do. So it's as simplistic as that. Now, I should add that this was first added by OpenAI, but now most of the large language models, including Claude 3.5, Sonnet, and others, they have function calling as well. So initially it was only OpenAI, but using OpenAI libraries, you can also do this in other large language models, including some open source as well. But the other thing that recently came about, which is gaining a lot of steam, is the whole notion of agents. So first of all, what is an agent? An agent is, the way I think about it is, think about agents as a microservice for AI, which is a self-encapsulated, maybe it tries to mimic a human in the cognitive architecture. So an agent consists of three things. It consists of a large language model. It consists of tools, which I'll get into. And three, it might consist of also knowledge of its own. So knowledge of its own could be, again, either through accessing tools, or if you use some sort of an abstraction layer like OpenAI assistants and so on, then within that, you can just upload your data to the unstructured, and that becomes part of the knowledge. So thinking now like, let's say, I use Cursor quite a lot these days. Cursor uses, or I think Claude Engineer uses agents. So you break down the tasks that come in. It's agentic. It's not just information retrieval. And then you say, oh, this one needs to go grab structured data. I have a specific agent for it. And in that agent, I give it different tools. One tool could be to get the most popular products. It's running an analytics query. The other one could be get me the user data. Then the agent gives back the structured data with analytics, which you then blend with the unstructured data, and now you're responding. Keep in mind, though, the table stake still is this entire query should be less than a second or two at the most. So how do we, show this? One, what I'm going to do is, of course, use SingleStore, because not only because I work here, but also because I do think it's the best speedy layer, so to speak, or a place where you can do SQL, you can do JSON, you can do analytics, you can do row-based transactional queries, you can do vector and keyword search. So just for those people who don't know, I'll just do a quick walkthrough of what that is. Then I'll show you how to use Next.js to connect to it, and then build a very simple RAG-based application that also does function calling. And third, at a very high level, this would be just a very small but small demo for Flowwise, which is a no-code tool for agents. I love Flowwise as well, which shows you how you would do a tool within an agent to do the exact same thing. So let's first talk a little bit about SingleStore. I think maybe we should just rename it as a too good to be true database. But the reality is it's not overnight. It has been over the last 11 years. And initially it was called MemSQL because it was an in-memory only distributed SQL database. And because it was in memory, we compressed the data. So we got a pattern for that. And any data that you now bring into SingleStore is already 60% or so compressed as compared to Postgres, MySQL, and others. And today, now it's memory first, not memory only. But we added ACID, skip list, and of course, it's horizontally scalable. So at the row level or row-based, we do compression and we have our own indices, patented indices, algorithms that makes it super fast across huge amounts of data. The second thing that we added over a period of time was that when you put in the data, it also stores the data as a columnar data or columnar storage. So there are certain analytics databases and data warehouses that specifically use the columnar architecture only because it's good for aggregate functions, like give me a sum, average, ascending, descending, and so on, which is terrible if you use it in MySQL or even JSON-based databases. It's not meant for analytics. But what we did, we created this patented technology again, which keeps a copy of the row-based and also adds columnar-based. But we use the same thing around compression. And over a period of time, which I'll show in the next slide, that data moves from in-memory to local disks and then finally into object storage, which could be S3. And then finally in 2017, we had keyword search, but when the paper from Google came out or DeepMind on attention is all you need, they introduced the transformers model. We added a vector then into the multiple data types that we were already supporting. And more recently, we upgraded Lucene for keyword search, which uses BM25. So now you have SQL, JSON, time series. You can run SQL queries, you can run Mongo SH-based queries, and you can also do dot product as well as an exact keyword match. And the best part is, like I said, you can do all of it in one single query if you wanted to. So the only thing take of it from this is we have extremely large customers. I think about 50 or 60% of our overall revenue comes from Fortune 500 companies, which is very sensitive about performance, as well as security and other things related to enterprises. This is exactly what I talked about when the data pipeline comes in, and it's a distributed architecture. So you have an aggregator node and you have leaf nodes, and we do all of that within standard enterprise, shared nothing, multi-model, universal storage way. So now let me just show you a couple of things, and Yukti, I'll ask you to tell me if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. So here, what I would do is, let me first show you the SingleStore portion. And Yukti, let me know if it is too small for the audience, or if I need to
It's
make it.
actually really small. Can you enlarge the size?
Okay. Now?
Yeah, it seems to be a bit better.
Okay. So when you sign in or sign up for SingleStore, you would notice a few things. One is the highest level, which is called organization. So organization, you can think of it as a company. And if you're just signing up for yourself, your name could be an organization. Now, within the organization, there's this notion called deployments. And deployment is a way for us and for you, the customer, to separate the storage and the compute. And this is available across a bunch of other databases too, where you'd say, okay, the databases are here and it's separated. But when I run my workloads or queries, I create a workspace, which in essence is really a virtual machine. And the virtual machine has certain characteristics. So I pay only for that virtual machine and I pay for it. And if I don't use it for some reason, I can, just kill it or downgrade it or then upgrade it later on to something else. So here I have my the deployment. And as you can see, I have two kinds. One is the free tier. So when you sign up for the free tier, you only get one workspace and the database is created for you. You cannot create additional, but within that, you can create multiple tables and you can do other stuff. But I'm also on the paid or the standard edition where I have multiple work groups. Within work groups, I've created these workspaces and I have these databases. So first thing first, you can create a database from here, or I'll show you the one way I do it as well. But after you have created this, let's say you've created a database, and this is what I'm using, which is MK Startup Upvote. That's an application that I've been working on. What you want to do is click on connect, and then say there are different ways you can connect. So you say your app, and it gives you the user ID. Password, of course, is hidden. This is your host. This is your port number. And if you've enabled Kai, you can actually use just a Mongo string to talk to it as well. And then, of course, your next question is, but what about the password? Well, the password you get by going to access, and this is hidden here, but you can reset it. So now I have user ID, I have password, I also have the database name, and I have the host name. This is all I need to now connect any client. So the first thing I do, this is kind of one of my favorite tools, which is called Table Plus. And Table Plus, I'm on a paid version, but there's a free version as well. So what you can do is you can look at all my tables, and it's pretty snappy because I can literally use it almost as an Excel sheet if I wanted to. And I can just go directly into a row. I can change it when it becomes red. I can commit it and so on. So let's take a look at these tables. There's a books table, which has a list of all the books. So think of it as a library. But each table also consists of ratings and reviews. But there are certain books where I have taken these books, and what we have done is we have created the vectors of those books. And let me see, what was the column name here? Embedding collection name. So then what I've also done is for some books, we have taken those books and have separate tables for them. So for example, essay on photography is stored as here's a chunk of the text and here's the corresponding vector stored in it. For this purposes, I just stored it as a binary JSON or a binary object. But within SingleStore, there is something called a vector data type. And that vector data type is just floats. So if you want to have stricter typing and stuff, you can do that. So now I've connected, and I can see my tables and stuff. Now let's go to the app that I built. So if I go to localhost 3000, this is the fun app I'm building, which has a different story to it, where there are AI companies that are coming in and some of them going away. So the goal is to be able to say, hey, if you have an AI company, just like Reddit, you can go post about it here, and it will insert that row inside of SingleStore. And then when you log in, I haven't implemented the login yet, you can actually go and upvote it. One person can only upvote once. And then there'll be a leaderboard of which AI companies are doing better or getting more votes in a day and so on. But that's not why we're here. The reason why we're here is because I wanted to show this. This is a simple chatbot that uses Elegance SDK. I'll talk a little bit about that. And when I click on this chatbots drop down, it actually shows me different books I can talk to. And those are the books which has the embeddings. It doesn't show all the books. So let's say A Journey to the Center of Earth. And I say, what is this book about? And it does straight up RAG, but in this RAG, it's using unstructured data because it's taken all the unstructured data and then it's bringing the data back from the vectors, giving it to the LLM, the whole thing that we talked about. And I could continue to just be specifically grounded to this book. I would say, who wrote this book? Hopefully the LLM doesn't hallucinate. And if I remember from my childhood, of course, it's Jules Verne's, right? So this is great. But now I want to get also the structured data part, which is, all right, that's great. All the unstructured data is fine. But I also want to see what are the popular books by ratings or reviews. So for that, I can't do a vector search. In fact, I would be an idiot if I did a vector search for something like this. That's a different query. And to show you what I mean, that query is literally this, which is saying, sorry, not this, which is saying, select ID, title, author, rating from books, order by rating, and show it to me by descending order, and only show me the top 5. This is an example, of course, with the application, I've done something different. But this could get as complicated for analytics. It could say, also look at the Kafka stream of real-time data coming in, just do an ascending, descending, average, all the other good stuff. And so when I say, okay, now show me what are the popular books by rating, it basically then uses my function calling to make that query into SingleStore. And it also gets back the structured query, which in this case is, by the rating, because that's what I asked for, but it could be by the reviews and other stuff too. And I can keep going on and on. So this is a very simplistic, almost a naive example, but it shows you both the structured and unstructured data. So how did I go about building this? First and foremost, what you can do is you just create a simple npx create app, or you can go to something like Elegance SDK, which is what I used. Elegance SDK is a library that we built to this exact book example is within there. And you can see that it gives you example of running either a chat completion with OpenAI, and OpenAI also supports other large language models. And you can call the Elegance SDK libraries or methods from within your own components. And then finally, what I wanted to show you is that since we are using Next.js, this is the overall flow. So let's look at this. The client sends a user message. Next.js has both server and client. And here we call the functions, or we actually call OpenAI to say, hey, here's a bunch of my functions. I want you to call these functions if there is a question related to popular books. And OpenAI notes it and say, okay, I'm going to ask for executing this function. So it executes that function, gets back that JSON, and then sends it back to OpenAI. And OpenAI then says, okay, here are the most popular books. It's as simple as that. Now, if I were to show you the code here, which is exactly what I used, you first go create a simple application, and then you create an API endpoint where you put in your OpenAI key, you put in a model, and then you say return a streaming response. Next step, you then create your functions. So here I'm saying, hey, here are the functions to call. In my case, it's not top stories, it's the most popular books. This is the description, which is extremely important for the large language model to know what this function will get it. So this is almost like a prompt. You have to be very descriptive. And then these are certain function parameters that it might be expecting. In my case, it's none. And then you might have other functions here. And then you basically call that function through run function. And that's pretty much it. Then you go to your route where you had created that completion. And then within that, you just add this portion which says, okay, don't just get my response, also use the function calling functionality of OpenAI, which then goes and looks at my function, looks at the description, then says, okay, I see that I need to call this function, calls the function, gets the JSON back, and send it over. So for me, the way it looks is this is one page and this is one component. So this component is called container.tsx, right? And I have it within components chat. And again, very similar. I've defined the functions. I have a form. And in that form, by the way, I'm doing another call to get those 5 books that have embeddings and then showing it here. And then simply, it is just the exact same thing that I showed you on the Vercel's documentation site. And then I wrap it all around in this Elegance SDK libraries. So I didn't really have to design all of this. I could just utilize what's already available in Elegance SDK, but you could choose other libraries if you're more used to that. And that's pretty much it. The only thing I would show you, only other thing I would show you is the function call itself. So I have a .env file where you put in all your credentials. And then finally, if you look under lib and book, I have this one simple query, but it could be your 16-page SQL query, which says, get me the Elegant server client. And within that, there's a controller and a method called query. And then just run this SQL that I have. It will give you back the result. You get it in your chat completion. You format it into a JSON, and then you respond. So that takes care of the Next.js part, right? Let's see. So we did this, we did this. Now let's look at agent with tools. So remember, similar to what we talked about for functions, it's almost identical that in assistants, a tool is a function in the sense it's kind of encapsulated in its own code. But I could have multiple tools, just like I could have multiple applications connected to the same agent. And because that agent might have a different large language model, maybe an open source one, because you're doing something different, or maybe even a text to SQL over there if you have fine-tuned it differently, then that agent basically is responsible for structured query. And I could have as many SQLs as I want. So you now have another agent calling this agent, or it could be your chat interface too, to say, hey, I need some structured data. Here's plain English. It then converts it into its own understanding, calls those tools, the tools respond. You just have to make sure that it responds in JSON, and then you send it back along. So how does this work? Well, here's this Flowwise. If you're not familiar with Flowwise, Flowwise is one of my favorite tools. It uses LangChain and LlamaIndex under the hood, and it's a no-code workflow engine where you can create an entire chat flow, you can create an agent, and so on, right? So as you can see, I have a couple of these chat flows. And by the way, this is open source, so I'm running it on my own instance at $8 a month. And if people are interested in finding out how, just drop us a note. Maybe we'll do another webinar just specifically for this. So what we're interested in is tools. And here, I could either go to a tool, create a new one, Or within the marketplaces, there's a bunch of tools that's already available. And if I just do this, so let's say there's a Perplexity AI search. And if I look at this, it's basically a simple JavaScript function. The parameters, you can grab it over here. And the rest, you would just, do a post or a fetch, get back the response, and you are basically stringifying it as a JSON, returning it. Pretty straightforward. So what I've done is I've created my own tool, and it's called Get Popular Books. And as you can see, it's not very complicated. I'm just doing a MySQL to client connection. I run my queries, query the database, and then I stringify it. As simple as that. Now I can go to an agent flow, or here I could just say agent. And if I use let's say it's actually tool agent, I can drag and drop it here. And then what I can do is I can also add the custom tool that I created. So it should be under tools. It should be custom here. And then within here, I choose the tool by just clicking on this, and the tool that I created is here. All I do now is connect it to this agent. So now this agent has access to this tool. And all I do is within the prompt, I tell it, I create a memory, which is just a buffer memory, which you can use a bunch of different things. And now all of this is actually kind of available to me either as a chatbot that I can embed in my website, or I could also expose an API endpoint that I can just call from my Next.js application, from a notebook and other stuff. So that's kind of the overall flow. And I know we covered quite a lot, so let me just summarize it very quickly. But in the end, you have one database for both unstructured and unstructured, includes vectors as well as all the other stuff we talked about. You could have any application that you're talking to, use the OpenAI function calling method, and you connect to the database, you write your SQL query, and now you're able to access it through function. Or using the same mechanism, you can create an agent. And by the way, there are a bunch of different agent tools and methodology as well. The one that's my favorite is NVIDIA's, because it's extremely fast. And it also uses open source as well. But you could choose a bunch of other agent, both workflows as well as agent frameworks and tools as well. And that's pretty much it. So it's a very simple example. You could, if you want to get started, just go to elegancesdk.com, and you can follow this to just create your own simple RAG-based app. And then based on that, you can just go create add functions. Or if you've already created your you already created your Next.js application, then using the steps that I showed, you just go create your own functions, and then you're able to talk to it. So with that, I will stop here and see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much for the amazing demo, Madhukar. So we actually have a lot of questions for you, and it's from one person. Actually, two people. Like, so one is a question from Crispin, and I don't know how to pronounce that name. I, I'm very sorry about that. So I don't want to ruin it. So yeah, you can. I hope you can go through the questions yourself, right?
Yeah, I can. I'm just looking at it. All right. So the first one is, how does graph fit into the mix? Great deal of interest here. That's a great question. So graph is a way to, you can actually use it in a bunch of different ways. Graph, one way, is a way to encapsulate all your databases and the schemas that you have and convert it into a knowledge graph. So a knowledge graph would be, hey, this database is connected to this database. This has this metadata and this data, and they are connected to each other. And so and that's more for accuracy. So before you make any other call, you reach out to that database and then you get back the connection information, then you send it to RAG. That's one way to do it, but you could also create a knowledge graph. If you think about it, knowledge graph is a bunch of lookup tables. It tells you the two objects, the relationship, maybe the strength between it. And so you can actually also do that through SQL. There are pros and cons of using a graph database. The pro is, it is meant for graphs. The con is you would have to learn another language to query it. You would have another database to create it. But mostly, yeah, graph is for figuring out the knowledge graph of your entire enterprise data and then utilizing it. How to talk to SQL data with function calling. Okay, that's what I just went through. What strategies does SingleStore offer for scaling, but SQL functions that call complex queries or involve large data sets? Yeah, good question. So there is the enterprise features, and I would say this question goes into a little bit more deeper than my knowledge about the scalability in SingleStore, but we do have things like shard keys and so on, which allows you to control when you are scaling the data, where some of your data is located, and if you want it closer to a certain query and so on. And then there's, of course, the overall query optimization as well. There is a really good course by Jack Ellis on this SingleStore versus MySQL, I think, which if you just Google, you would see that it has a bunch of really good information around that. How does SingleStore handle error reporting in function-based SQL query execution? Are there built-in mechanisms for retrying failed operations? That is more at the application level. If you run the query and the query, first thing I would do is if you're running a straight up SQL query, you want to run it directly in your client first or in your notebook or whatever to make sure it's giving you the desired results. And then when you add it to your application, in the application itself, you would do your error handling. All right. What will happen if a user asks a natural language query that is a valid task, but the tools does not cover it? Will I still retrieve valid data? Really good questions. If the tools do not exist, then it falls back to the prompt of what you want the large language model to do. That's where advanced RAG comes in, and you could ground it using certain other libraries. The Nemo guardrails is a pretty good one. And it basically allows you to even not go into the database if the query will not get the right results, or the data doesn't exist, or it's an inappropriate request. So there's several different strategies, but again, it is at the function calling level, not in the database level. Which chatbot platforms offer the best integration with SingleStore in terms of real-time data fetching? So in terms of real-time data fetching, you can connect Kafka, you can have an S3 bucket and all, and you can immediately start querying the data as the data is coming in through something called pipelines. In terms of using the frameworks within AI, there's a connector for SingleStore within OpenAI. We have had a connector for both LangChain and Llama Index for a very long time. We also have a connector with Zapier too. And we also have, I'm missing something. Flowwise, of course, we have a vector store connector over there too. We are also building a Drizzle connectors. So wherever, even if there are none, wherever you can use MySQL, you can use SingleStore because it's MySQL wire protocol compatible. Should the chatbot use direct SQL queries, or should an API layer be introduced between the chatbot and the database? The answer, if I were to build this as a production system, I would do it through an API. because then I could get API gateways through it. If you do direct SQL, you're kind of adding a lot more headache for the future. But if your application is not meant for 100,000 concurrent user, that should be fine as well. All right, I think those are all the questions I see.
We have one more question from Razat Shankar. They say that what will happen if the user asks a natural language query that is a valid task, but the tools does not cover it? Will I still retrieve the valid data?
Yeah, I just answered that, so we should be good
All
there.
right, sounds good. So yeah, there's no more questions that are there, and all the questions have been taken up. If you have any questions, please feel free to keep them coming in. Madhukar, can you please share your screen again? I would like to announce the future upcoming webinars for anyone that joined late. They're also present in the chat. I'll put it again, and that also has a link to the raffle that I announced earlier. So feel free to join us on September 9th. We are presenting Augment Your DB to speed up and scale your SaaS app. And you can scan the QR code. It will directly take you to the landing page. And on September 10th, we are doing a very hands-on session called Intro to Vectors with Akmal Chaudhary, who's a very regular speaker at our webinars. And it's a very beginner-friendly webinar. So feel free to tune in. And on September 20th, we have how to use SingleStore for auto scaling. And if any of these topics are interesting to you, feel free to RSVP right now. And I hope to see you all there. We also have announced our AirPods raffle that was announced earlier during the session today. So this is your last chance to sign up to SingleStore and load in your data. And can you please go to the next slide, Madhukar? I've also put the link in the chat and it's present on your screen as well. Feel free to scan the QR code and it just takes 10 seconds. And feel free to try out SingleStore. I will be announcing the winner by the end of the day via email. So stay tuned for that. And thanks everyone for joining in. Have a great rest of the day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.